Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm a Studio Associate Professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary Mies van der Rohe, and I'm adjunct faculty at Columbia College Chicago in the Interior Architecture program. Shout out to all of my students. I hope you're doing well. If you're watching this video for a class, then it's probably the beginning of the semester. So happy new semester to you. I hope everyone out there is doing great. I'm doing well. It's at the time of recording this, it's a chilly December day and starting to get a little snowflake, so not too bad at all actually. Today we're going to be making a drawing, really, a drawing with some color, a mix of vector and raster, and you can see that in this Photoshop JPEG here. And the line work is actually going to come from Rhino, and we're going to bring that line work from Rhino into Photoshop and do some coloring to it. Alright, before we jump fully into the tutorial, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and subscribe to it. You'll click on the big red bar that says subscribe and then click on the little bell to receive all of the notifications. Also, you'll have an opportunity at the end of the video to click on my big head that pops up in the upper left. I've recently made it to 7,000 subscribers, so I'm pretty pumped up about that. So pretty excited about keeping this community growing. Also, connect with me on Instagram at my first name Alfonso _ my last name Peluso. Just recently reached 1,500 followers, so I'm pretty excited about that. Just recently had some final reviews at IIT, and you can see some of my students were socially distancing and protecting themselves with masks, but it was great to have everybody there in person presenting their finals. Alright, so the folding pattern that we're going to work on today is taken from the book by Paul Jackson, Folding Techniques for Designers from Sheet to Form. And this is the pattern we're looking at in plan. It's just a simple X with a valley fold down through the middle of it. So here's that valley fold down through the middle, and then there is your X. So we're going to be making that in Rhino. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new file in Rhino, and it's going to be small objects inches. And I'm going to double click and expand my perspective view, and I'm going to set my perspective view. I'm going to set the grid in my perspective view, so I'm going to type in the command DOC, short for document properties, and I'm going to go over to grid, and I'm going to make a grid line count of 24, and all my minor grid lines will be 1 inch, and my major lines every 6 inches. Nothing magical about this, so this gives me a grid of 24 by 24 with some minor grid lines every 1 inch apart, and then some heavier grid lines every 6 inches apart. So it just gives me some room to work. And my snap spacing, I'm going to match that to my minor grid lines. I'm going to match that to 1. Okay. So, in the upper right quadrant, this is my 24 inches by 24 inches. These heavy outlines are 6 inches by 6 inches. And the smaller inner outlines are all 1 inch by 1 inch. Alright, so I'm going to make a layer, or just rename layer 1 by double clicking on it, and I'm going to call this guidelines. Okay, so that's the current layer. And what I'm going to do is, from the Paul Jackson book, is I'm going to just draw the X that goes through it, and then I'll draw this line as well. Okay, so I'm going to type in the command line, making sure that my grid snap is on at the very bottom, so grid snap should be on. And I'm going to draw my line. and my other line. So there's my X, and I'm just working at the origin. And then this other line didn't quite go all the way, and we'll see that in the fold there. So I'm leaving that off the edges by 1 inch. And if we look at that, depending on how much of a fold we push into that, is how much that line is taken away from, let's say out here, this one proportionally is would be a lot more than 1 inch, but we'll be okay with ours. Next thing I want to draw is this this apex. So I want to draw this three-dimensional apex. So I'm going to go ahead and type in line, and I'm going to make this a vertical line. So in the command line where it says start of line, I'm going to click on vertical, and I'm going to snap to that. And now this is giving my 1 inch. Every time I move the cursor and it goes up and drags that dot with me, it's 1 inch. So I'm going to drag it up 1, 2, let's try 3 inches. So 1, 2, 3 inch. Okay. That might be a little tall. Let's do 2 inches. Sorry about that. We'll do 2 inches line, vertical. So 1, 2. All right, perfect. Okay. So we have that. We have this set up here. So we're going to draw some edges. So it's a symmetrical pattern, so we're not going to need every single edge and every single surface. There's really only the 2 that we need, and then we can do some mirroring. So I'm going to draw this one that's highlighting in white, and then I'll draw this one that's in gray. So let's start with this one that's in white. So I'm going to make a layer called edges. I'm going to make that layer current, and I'm going to draw a polyline. Okay, so from there up to that line, down to that, and back. Alright, so that's the first edge there. Alright, so now I'll draw, so that was this white line. Now I'm going to draw this darker area. Okay, so same thing, I'm going to use polyline, go through and snap. Okay, so there I have those 2. And what I can do is I can make surfaces. I want to make surfaces out of those. So I'm just being very organized with my layers. It's really important. So I'm going to rename this layer, call it surface, make it current. Okay, so what the command I can use to make surfaces out of those is a command called planar surf. Okay, and I'll do that with the other one as well. Okay, so those are my 2 planar surfaces. So if I make these rendered, you could see the 2 planar surfaces. Alright, so now I can take those 2 and I can mirror them. And now I'm just missing this front surface here, which is made up of these 2. So I can mirror those 2 over. Okay, so there I have the full form. I'm going to turn off my edges layer. Okay, so there's, pretty much the surface. Now what I want to do is I want to introduce 3 line weights: a thick, a medium, and a thin. So layer 4, I'm going to make that thick. And I'm going to make its color black. Okay. And I'm going to make its print width 1.2. So these are my thick lines, 1.2. I want to make sure that's thick enough. Okay, and I'm going to draw a polyline around the entire outside of this. Oops. Okay, so there's my polyline. It's tracing the entire outside. Okay, so I want to see that in black, and I want to see that at a print width of 1.2. So there's a special command that I need to type in to be able to see that. What's that command? So everybody at home is shouting. Print display. Print display, yes. Print display. Okay, and I'm going to click on state equal off, and that's going to change it to state equal on. I have to click on. Okay, so nice. Now my thick lines have arrived, and they show up really nice. So that looks really good. Okay, so I'm going to change this layer 5 to medium. Oh, I must be in the middle of a command. Yep. Okay, so change this to medium. Gotta be careful with that print display. I always end up forgetting to hit the last enter to get out of that command. And then it doesn't allow me to do anything. Sometimes you think the computer has crashed. Okay, so medium. I'm not going to use a white color to draw, so I'm just going to give it a green color, but I'm going to make its print color black. And this is medium, so I'm going to make it 0.6. Okay, so with this one, I'm just going to draw these edges. So this would be the ridge folds. Okay, so the ridge folds I'm making medium. And then the two valley folds, I'm going to make those thin. So I'm going to make a new layer. Make that thin. Make its print width 0.13. Now, I'm realizing as I'm drawing these that I'm not seeing the lines very thin. So they look very much like the medium, and that's because I drew those with the medium layer current. So I'm going to select those two lines, and I'm going to right click and choose change object layer and change those to the thin layer. Alright, perfect. Alright, great. So now we have one of these, and we can array it. So I'm just going to do it the cheap way, which is just copy it. So I don't need my guidelines. All I need is the surface and the thick, medium, and thin. So it looks like we have that right now. So I'm going to take that and copy. And I'm going to take these and copy these. Okay. Okay. Alright. Alright. So now we have arrayed this, and we have multiple of these showing up. Okay. Alright, so we have multiple arrays of these. Now we're going to export these to Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export it a couple ways. One is I'm going to export this with everything just all at once, and then I'm going to export just the lines. The all at once is something we won't actually use in the end, but it will inform us as to what we want to be shaded. Okay, before we do that, something important is we want to change the view display. We want to change this to parallel. Okay, so this needs to be parallel. Alright, so my dog Rita today has been pretty active. And first she was chasing some squirrels out there and some dogs, which is pretty normal. Now she's grabbed her little toy caterpillar, squeaky toy. So always something fun happening at the house with Rita. She's a good dog. Alright, so I want to change this view to parallel. So I'm going to, under perspective, I'm going to go to set view, and I'm going to change this to, I want to change this to parallel. So I guess I have to do it not under set view, but here under where it says perspective. So I'm just going to change that to parallel. Okay, so what parallel is going to allow us to do is when we do our coloring in Photoshop, each of these units will still be one size. There will be no perspective on them. So we'll be able to copy the coloring from one unit to the other. If there was perspective, we wouldn't be able to copy from one unit to the other. Okay, so that's important that we're doing a parallel view. And that's just by having nothing selected and going to properties and changing it to parallel. Okay, and what you want to do is get your view set up. Okay, I don't want it to be too close to a top view. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this view. I'm going to type in named view. It's very important to save these. So I'm typing in named view, and I'm going to click on a little floppy disk and save it. I'll call this one parallel. Okay, perfect. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and print this. Okay, so the first thing you're going to notice is that it doesn't look shaded or rendered in this view setup here. So that's because that's the difference between a vector and a raster. So if we have surfaces, which we do, I'm going to print this with surfaces, it has to be a raster. So I'm going to click that to raster. Okay, so now we're seeing that raster view. For right now, I'm printing to Adobe PDF. Letter size is fine. That's pretty much it. So just making Adobe PDF, size letter, landscape, raster output for this one where we're printing all of these out. Okay, I'll print that. And just gonna name it. Okay, so we'll be opening this up in Photoshop in a little bit. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So in Photoshop, if I open up this file, something important is I need to change this crop to. It cannot be bounding box. I need to change this to media box. Okay, so bounding box, it went to my edges, so it's not 8.5 by 11, it's whatever this number is, and ours is, will all be different. So I want to change this to media box. That's important. Okay, so there it is. It comes in just fine. And now what I want is I want a version of this which is just lines. So what I need to do here in Rhino is I'm going to turn off my surfaces, and I'm going to go ahead and print this. I'm not panning or moving my mouse around. If you did, it's no big deal. You can always go to named view and restore the latest view. You can always do that if you accidentally move your view. Okay, so let's print this. And this time we're going to use a vector output. Now this is really important. You might have thought, well, it looks fine as a raster output. Two reasons why this has to be a vector output. One is you're working with just lines, and you want those lines to be as crisp as possible. The second is you want this to have a transparent background. You want to be able to see through it. So it has to be vector. It will not give you a transparent background with the raster output. So those are the two reasons this needs to be vector. Okay. Okay, so let's open that up. Okay, making sure crop to is media box. Okay, so you see that it has a transparent. This one is not a transparent, so the raster output will not give you a transparent background, but the vector will. So I'm going to take that Control A, which is select all, Control C, which is copy. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to main menu, edit, paste special, paste in place. Okay, so layer 2 is just lines. So you want to be very organized in your layering system in Photoshop. So layer 2 is just lines. Layer 1 is that's shaded. Okay, eventually we won't use this layer, so I'm going to say turn off. Okay. So last thing to do is figure out a coloring scheme for this. So again, because it's parallel, we only have to color one of these. Look at the line quality. It's really nice line quality because those were vector lines, even though I'm in a raster software, which is Photoshop. Photoshop. We love Photoshop, don't we? Photoshop is our best friend when it comes down to it. Alright. Alright, so this white area, I'm going to leave all the white. I won't paint that. I'll paint these faces here. I'll paint this inside a darker blue, and I'll paint this outside a lighter blue. So what I'm going to do is on my just lines layer, okay, with that one current, I'm going to be able to use the magic wand. I'm just using the default tolerance of 20, and I'll be able to go inside here and select that area, that one triangular area. Okay, so I have that selected, and I'm going to paint that a bluish color. Okay, so I picked that bluish color. I'm going to go to main menu, edit, fill, and make sure the contents are the foreground color. Now, as I'm thinking about it and I'm doing this, I want this to be on its own layer. I don't want it to be on the just lines layer. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to make a new layer, and we'll call this color. Okay, and so we're on our color layer, so I'll go ahead and fill that. Okay, perfect. So when I turn my shaded on, I'm going to want a darker blue for these two areas. Okay, so I'm going to go to my just lines layer, and I'm going to pick these two areas with my shift key there, and I'm going to go ahead and swap that, just making this a little bit darker. Okay, and I'll fill it. So I'm just going to do some adjustments here while I have it selected. Image adjustments, I'm going to do like a hue saturation, and I'm going to add some saturation to that. Blue, and darken it up a little bit. Okay, and I'll Control D. Control D is a shortcut to deselect. Alright. Now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to paint these other two that same color. So now, see, I have to be really mindful, and I'm glad I did this. So you can see when I painted that last color, I did not paint it on a color layer. It ended up on the just lines, and that's very bad. So I'm going to go into my history just before the fill. So you got to be really mindful of your layers. Just got to take your time. So I'm going to go on my color layer and fill it. And I'll go ahead and do some adjustments, image adjustments, hue saturation, and I'll add some saturation to that, and I'll darken it up. Okay, and that's all on the color layer. Okay, perfect. Alright, I'm also going to want that same color to be in the back here. So I'm going to go to my just lines and add that in. Could have done this all at once. A few tricks will show up though since I didn't do it all at once. So to get this color to the foreground color, I'm going to use my eyedropper. Just click that. That ends up being the foreground color now. So when I go to edit fill, that's the foreground color. Alright, let's zoom out a little bit. Okay, so now we have this color that we're going to want to copy to all of the other units, and because this is a parallel view, it's going to allow us to do that. So I'm just going to save this as a PSD file while we're working on it. Okay, so for the color layer, I'm going to take that and I'm just going to Control J for copy. Makes a copy of that layer. And then I'm going to move that. Okay, so that last color fill didn't end up on the color layer. So let's see what actually happened there. Yeah, it ended up on the just lines layer. So just not a big deal, just be conscious of it. Let's go back in my history. Okay. Put my color layer as current. Edit, fill. Okay, perfect. So that should be on my color layer. Great. Now Control J is a shortcut. Control J or Command J, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC. Control J or Command J will make a copy. And I go ahead and copy that and zoom in a little bit. Now I like my color layer to be under. I want these lines to be above it. Okay, so it'll help me a little bit. So I'm just using my, sometimes the arrow key is your best friend. So I just use the arrow key to get that, the arrow keys to get that into place. And so that's two of them. So what I can do is I can shut off my just lines layer. So there I have just the color shade. The color looks nice by itself too. So I have just the color, and what I can do is I can right click here and I can choose merge visible. Okay, so now I have those two, and I can Control J to make a copy. So that's what I have there. Turn my lines back on and move these down. So with each copy, it's going to go a little bit faster because we have this ability to merge visible. Okay, so I can take that, and let me take a closer look before I merge these. Okay, so now I can, with just those two layers, I gotta each time I'm gonna merge, I gotta turn off the just lines. So I'll right click and choose merge visible, turn my just lines back on. I'll Control J to make a copy. Oh, Ilya, Moho. Just like to post on Instagram. Thank you for that. I'm sure I just butchered your name. I'm very sorry about that, but thank you if you're watching. Okay. Alright. Alright, so now I'm going to merge those two together. Make a copy. I think this will cover everything. So this was the reason why we made it parallel, so that we were able to paint one and then just copy it over to the others. So take some time in Photoshop, and this exercise is getting us used to spending time in Photoshop. When we get to doing some renderings, that's when you really spend time in Photoshop. So just a preparation for that. Alright, so those, our lines are on. Alright, I'm going to save this. Alright, so this is a PSD file, which is a file with layers, and it's always good to keep your files with layers. Don't ever delete your PSD files. Now the next thing you want to do is you want to save as. You want to save this as a JPEG. So I'm going to File, Save As, and change this to JPEG. Okay, that's called Pattern JPEG. Okay, so I'm going to close these drawings, and I'm going to open up. Okay, so Pattern JPEG. Going to open that up. So I want this to be square. Okay, and I want it to be 6 inches by 6 inches. So first thing I'm going to do, which is really important, is I am going to unlock this background layer. So I'm going to double click on it and unlock it. So this way when I go to Image, Canvas Size, so I went to Main Menu, Image, Canvas Size, and I changed this to 6 by 6. I can crop it, and this way I can move the background layer. If I hadn't double clicked to turn this into layer 0, I would not have been able to move this background layer. Now I want this to be full bleed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Control T, and I'm going to scale it to be a little bit bigger so that it takes up the edges. So I get it to be full bleed. There, that's full bleed, 6 by 6. Alright, so that's using Rhino and Photoshop to make a drawing with some color and some line weights. So I hope you enjoyed this video. My head's going to pop up in the top left, and you can click on subscribe. Click on my head to subscribe, and I'll have some videos that are going to pop up in the upper right for you. Alright, I will see you next time.